I think that we can start. Okay. So today we shall first finish our PN calculation of the Fokker action in GR. And the Fokker action was defined yesterday, starting from the Einstein-Hilbert action of GR, which consists of the term for the gravitational field, which is the Einstein-Hilbert term with some Lagrangian density, which depends on the gravitational field, and to which we have added a gauge fixing term. In order to be in harmonic coordinates. And then we have the matter action, which is the usual action for particles, for a system of n particles in GR, that I wrote it yesterday in the following form, using the coordinate velocities VA that are just the ordinary velocities with respect to the coordinate time t. Now, if you vary that action, you get the Einstein field equation in relaxed form, in which already the gauge condition imposed by our gauge fixing term has been implemented in the equations. And so we have the equations as a form of ordinary wave equation that are sourced by the matter term, and the matter term comes from the variation of the matter action with respect to the metric. And then there is a nonlinear term which involves all the nonlinearity of the field equation, which depends on h and its space-time derivatives. Now, to obtain the Fokker action, we first have to solve the latter equation using our PN approximation, and I gave you yesterday the explicit implementation of the post-Newtonian iteration scheme in order to get an explicit solution for the field, which will depend at any field point x on the positions, velocity, possibly acceleration of our matter n particle system. And we replace this solution of the field equations back into the gauge-fixed Einstein-Hilbert action to obtain the Fokker Lagrangian, which is now just a function of the particles' degrees of freedom, position, velocities, and so on, which therefore consists of two terms. The gravitational term, which depends on the positions through the metric. So it's an explicit PN solution. Now, and the matter term, which will be a sum of this expression, but now evaluated for that particular metric, PN solution, therefore, which depends on the metric at position B, but which depends also on all the other positions and velocities of the bodies. And varying the Fokker action with respect to the particles gives you the equations of motion possibly at very high order. It's a powerful technique. It's much more complicated to try to work out the equations of motion directly at the level of the equations of motion. That would be possible, but this is very complicated. Here, this is the most beautiful way and most simpler way to get the equations of motion. Now, the question, when you do high-order PN calculations, you will ask yourself, to which order should I need to solve the Einstein field equation by means of my iterated PN scheme in order to get the Fokker action correct up to some order, say NPN order. So, a question, to which order should I solve the Einstein field equations for the field, that is for my solution H or H bar? There will be, I will solve it up to some order n that I will determine and therefore which is known. And then I will neglect some higher order term in my PN calculation, and I want to know to which order I should consider this iteration in order to get the Fokker action correct to NPN order. And the answer is that I should control all the terms in the PN metric up to small reminders that are O of C to the n plus 3. This seems to be quite natural for you, but remind that when I say that the Fokker action should be correct up to NPN order, is that I should control all the terms in the PN action, which will be 1 over 1, the Newtonian term, plus the 1 PN correction, plus the 2 PN correction, and plus something which is at n PN order, which means 2n. And then I will neglect the higher order term. And you see that in order to go up to order 1 over C2n, we need essentially to go for the field itself only up to order n, which is a very nice property of the Fokker action that I will prove for you, but which shows that indeed for the motion, to get the motion at the 4 PN order, say, then we don't need to control and to solve the Einstein field equations at the 4 PN order itself. Only essentially 2 PN order will be sufficient. So this is why I was saying that it is a much simpler and much better method to work at the level of the action rather than at the level of the equations of motion, where you have to really iterate your field equations up to the highest order. So the proof of that is that first we recall that since H bar is an exact solution but computed perturbatively in PN, in the PN expansion of the field equations, of the Einstein field equations, this H bar solution satisfies the principle of minimal or extremum action, and therefore the derivative, functional derivative of my Fokker action with respect to that metric is 0. This is by definition of the equations, of the field equations deduced from my action. And this is, since we know the Einstein field equation, this is something like, or this is exactly C4 over 16 pi j from the equations times box of H minus the matter term and minus the non-linearity term. This is completely the definition of the Einstein field equation deduced from the Fokker action. And now this implies that since we have solved these equations up to some order n or n plus 2 and neglect this term, this means that the Fokker action or the variation of the Fokker action with respect to h, but for the known terms that we have just computed by iteration, that is for hn, is due only to the small remainder that we have here, which is just the terms that we have neglected in our iteration of the field equations. And this is given, therefore, by h delta h, the remainder, multiplied by C4. C4 times 1 over Cn plus 3, which is therefore O of Cn minus 1. Now the Fokker action, this is what we want to control at the nth Pn order. So the Fokker action for this solution will be given by the Fokker action for the terms that we have just computed, plus, and I am doing just a Taylor expansion of the true solution with respect to the solution that we have explicitly determined. It will be the action that we want to derive, and we want to prove that it is correct up to n Pn order, plus some terms which comes from the Taylor expansion of that action and there will be the functional derivative of the action with respect to hn multiplied by the small correction that we have ignored and that we don't know, but we want to show that it is sufficiently small in our derivation. And there will be terms that will be of the second order in this correction. And you see that immediately that this term has been determined to be of the order of 1 over Cn minus 1. And on the other hand, the neglected term here, if I am following already my answer, that I will prove it to be correct, is of order 1 over Cn plus 3. Which means that this will be of order 1 over C2n plus 2, which means indeed that my action is correct. Plus O of 1 over C2n plus 2, which means that it is correct up to nPn order. Okay, so since we have established this result, we can then parameterize the solution of the Einstein field equations up to that order. And for, say, to compute 4Pn, n will be 4, and we shall need to determine the metric essentially up to order O of C1 over C6, And we need to determine the metric, the component of the metric. And actually, in the component of the metric, we have to add the spatial trace of the metric because this is essentially, actually, at the highest order, the covariant component of the metric. And then we have to add the component of the time-space metric, and then the purely spatial component of the metric. This should be determined up to O of 1 over C, according to the lemma. 1 over C6, 1 over C5, and 1 over C6 included. So I am already at the 4pn order, just to sketch for you the state of the art, which is indeed 4pn order. Yesterday, you have seen the complete calculation at the Newtonian order, but now, let us, so we are now a bit more ambitious, and I will start again with parameterizing the metric by convenient potential, scalar potential, vector potential, like in the 1pn approximation we discussed yesterday. But at the higher order, of course, there will be some really tensorial potentials parameterizing the component, the space component of my metric. So let me just sketch for you what is very good, actually, parameterization of the metric up to that order. So you remember yesterday the scalar potential V and the vector potential Vi, which enter there, but we have now to push, so that was the 1pn approximation, and we have now to push these two higher order terms, including term of order 1 over C6. So I will denote here by x hat a convenient potential that we use, and there will be plenty of other terms, and I am allowed to neglect all the higher order terms. And you see, this is essentially a 2pn term. Here we have the 1pn term, and here we have the Newtonian term. And you see that in the component 0, 0 of the metric, the 2pn term is sufficient to get the 4pn action. Now, for these time-space component, I will go to higher order. So there will be 1 over C5. There will be some potential Ri plus other terms. I don't write all the details, of course. So this will be accurate up to 5 order. And in the spatial metric, there will be some potential which is purely vectorial. And there will be 1 over C6 also. You have to introduce some potential there. And you have to neglect 1 over C8. So here you have a 1pn term. Here you have a 2pn term. And here you have a 2pn term. And here you have a 3pn term. Amazingly, strangely, or you need some information about the 3pn approximation only for the space-space components of the metric. So you remember yesterday we had defined the matter source to be a density, just a density in the source that was defined directly with respect to the stress energy tensor of your matter system. And we had also a current density in the source that was defined from the 0I component of the stress energy tensor, and we may define also a density of stresses in the source, possibly including the pressure in the source, okay, defined in that way. And the potentials take, for the scalar potential, the form of a just wave equation that we wrote yesterday to express the 1pn approximation. So like yesterday, we have these equations. And just to show you a bit some features of the definition of this potential, the purely vectorial potential, which is here, will have many terms, but there will be a term which is non-linear in the lowest order potential, scalar potential V. And the potential which appears here will obey an equation in which you will have many terms that are very simple to determine, but there will be also a difficult term which involves the quadratic previous potential W coupled itself with V. So there will be some quadratic nonlinear terms and some cubic terms, and so on. And so you go on to solve all these potentials for a matter source that is made of few particles. So each of the potential will be solved using the symmetric propagator. Indeed, in the Fokker action, this is an action, therefore we have to neglect the dissipative effect. We shall just consider the conservative dynamics of our system, neglecting the emission of gravitational radiation. In this formalism, the emission of gravitational radiation is treated separately, and I will do that just later, by considering the gravitational field itself, okay? And we shall have some connection between the radiation field and the equations of motion through what are called balance equations for various quantities, including the energy. So here, we neglect conservative effects, and actually the dissipative effect associated with gravitational waves will cancel out in the form of the Lagrangian, in the Fokker action. These are in the form of total time derivatives that can be ignored in the Fokker action. So consider the conservative dynamics, neglect radiation reaction, dissipative effect. You solve the equation by means of the symmetric propagator. That is, the inverse box operator will be given by the inverse Laplace operator, or the Poisson operator, plus 1 over c square d square over dt square Laplace minus 2, plus, since we know we need the V, this potential up to 2pn order in order to be consistent with my pn calculation, I will go to the next order where I will have the next term, which is here, and then I will neglect higher order terms. So this is a symmetric propagator, appropriate for the conservative dynamics of my source, which will act on the matter source. So there will be minus 4 pi g here, and the matter source is given by this. And the stress energy tensor is the one which comes from the variation of the matter action with respect to the metric. And for that source, actually, we have already seen what is that? We have terms that involve delta functions at the location of each of the particles, and so there will be another one for the for the other particles, okay? We call it generally mu tilde, where mu tilde 1 is just a function of time, and it comes from the explicit expression of the stress energy tensor of your matter, of your particles. And this is given by the mass of the particle, but there will be some relativistic corrections. There will be the determinant of the metric computed at the location 1 of the particle 1, and there will be the redshift factor, or the proper time, if you like, evaluated at 1. And this is just a function of time. And the explicit solution, V at 2pn order, can be obtained directly by applying the Laplace operator, inverse Laplace operator, on a delta function. And we use the fact that the Laplacian of 1 over R1 is, in the sense of distribution, minus 4 pi of the delta function at the location of 1. So we have our two particles, y1, y2. We have a field point, x, okay? We have the distance between the field point and the two source points that I denote R1 and R2, and the distance between the two source points, so which are my two-body system, is denoted R12. And using this, and using the fact that Laplace of R1 over 2 is 1 over R1, Laplace of R1 cube over 24 is R1 over 2, and so on, I can write explicitly the solution for my potentials. This is just a Newtonian-like potential for the first term, okay? And then the relativistic correction will involve second time derivative of mu tilde 1 that I have to keep here inside the time derivative because it's a function of time that I have to differentiate later. So this will be this quantity, and then the next order term, there will be d4 mu tilde 1 R1 cube over 24. And that's my result, which is the one that I will have to plug into my Fokker action. Yes? So, you mean for the dissipative effect? Yes, exactly. Exactly. So, in principle, dissipative effect should be included here, and there will be a 1 over c term here, 1 over c cube term there, okay, which come from the expansion of the retardation in the retarded integral. No, I will not write it here. I will write it here. So the V, the exact expression of the V, will be something like a retarded integral V at x, and times the source, which will be computed at x prime, but with a retardation. And the dissipative effect will come when you expand the retardations in the post-Newtonian way and keep the odd powers of 1 over c. So this will be essentially the Laplace of, say, minus 4 pi sigma. But at the next order, there will be a 1 over c correction, which will be obtained by expanding this at the next order, including the 1 over c correction, which is here. And this correction is just given by the integral over the density. And then I will have, at the next order, the term that I have written, which is conservative, of sigma, okay? And then at the next order, I will have again a dissipative term here, which comes again from this expansion, and it is given by d over dt square. You know, there will be d3x, x minus x prime square, sigma, something like that. So, including the dissipative effects gives you an effect in principle at order 1 over c, but this one will be 0 because of the conservation of mass. This is at the lowest order, the conserved the density. The density will obey a continuity equation, and the integral of the density is the mass, which is conserved, and therefore this term will be 0. So this term will actually be a term 0 plus something which is of order 1 over c cube, which will combine with this term. So we see that the V dissipative will be something like a term at order 1 over c cube, will start at 1 over c cube. Okay? But you can show that the leading order term in the dissipative expansion of the potential at 1 over c cube is just a function of time. You can see from that expansion, if you consider the next order correction, this is obviously just a function of time. And here also, you will use the conservation not only of mass, but also of the center of mass, or the linear momentum, at the lowest Newtonian order, to show that actually this will be a function of time. So, in the equations of motion, you will have to consider the gradient of the dissipative effect, and this will be just 0 at that lowest order, and so the leading term will be 1 over c5 in the equations of motion. And this is what I will call in the following lectures, maybe today, the radiation reaction force on your system, which is a 2.5 PN effect. Okay. So thanks for the question, because this introduces well the calculations that I will do later. So here, again, we neglect the dissipative effects. We consider only the conservative part of the motion, and we have our explicit potentials that are computed in this way. But I do not resist to show you how one can compute higher order terms. This one was very simple. The source of the potential is just made of delta functions. It's a compact support source, okay, just proportional to the matter, current, density and current. But we have higher order potentials, such as this one. How to compute the potential when in the right-hand side you have a source which has a non-compact support and which comes from the iteration of lowest order compact support potentials. So for this case, suppose that you want to compute the potential Wig made of many terms. At the lowest order, you will have the Laplace operator, inverse Poisson operator acting on the term, and I do not consider the higher order terms. And this, if I use the lowest order results here and plug them for the source of that potential, I will have di of, say, some g mu1 over r1. I do not write other terms. I will have gg g mu 2 over r2. And I write that here I have gm over r2 and gm over r1, because here there will be also the contribution gm1 over r1, but which is simple to handle combined with that one. I just want to show you how to compute this particular term. So this will be, so the mu's are just functions of time. So I can put them outside the integral, mu1, mu2. Okay? And then you will have some di of 1 over r1, dj of 1 over r2. Okay? And the trick is to say that actually, so r1 is x minus y1, and r2 similarly. I will rewrite this as not a derivative with respect to the field point, but with a derivative with respect to the source point. I will write modulo a sign. And this will be minus d over dy2 of 1 over r2. Okay? And now I can put these derivatives outside the integrals. So I have just, this would be the masses, and then I will have my source derivatives, and then I have the inverse Laplace of just 1 over r1, r2. And a nice feature of all these calculations that are performed in real space, we don't use any Fourier transforms. Our colleagues from effective field theory using the formalism of quantum field theory, Feynman diagrams, and so on, do all these calculations in the Fourier domain, but a very interesting point in the time domain, in the real space, is that there are special functions which can solve many of these nonlinear terms exactly in exact closed form expressions. And the best known function is the one of Fock, 1939, in his book of the 30s. And this solution is given by the log of the perimeter, you know, in this triangle that I have drawn here. The log of the sum of the distance r1 plus r2 plus r12 satisfies, indeed, is an exact solution valid in the sense of distributions of the expression of the equation that we wanted to solve. And therefore, this is just given by J, and we know what it is. And there are generalizations of that function to higher order. And when you compute terms that are couplings between these functions, that we call them elementary kernels in our calculations, so you have many of these kernels. You can couple them with powers of 1 over r and so on, and integrate over all space, and there are closed form expressions completely. You can do a complete closed form expression calculation in real space of many of your terms. And actually, at 4pn order, of all of your terms. And we think that there are problems with that arising only at the 5pn order. So you replace all these potential in the Fokker action, okay? The Fokker Lagrangian for the gravitational part will be an integral d3x of, there will be many h, box h, plus h square, box h. This will be extremely complicated. The metric is known in terms of the potential. The potential has been computed here and there, and you obtain that this will be a sum, at least for the most simplest term, of integrals over all space, of many terms which have the following structure: R1 to some power P, R2 to some power Q. There will be the unit vectors n1 and n2 in the play, in the game. n1 with many indices, n2 with indices. And there are plenty of terms that are just, which play the role of spectators in this calculation, because this is just the dependence in time through the velocities, KL, the acceleration, and with many terms, derivative of acceleration, and many terms like that, that are just functions of time, and that can be put outside the integration. But since we have more complicated functions arising here, and actually starting at the 2pn order, there are also powers of this perimeter of the triangle here, that is R2 plus R12 to the P or to some power n. So this is typically the type of terms that we have to compute. And I will just show you the Riesz formula. Which permits to compute many of these terms, which is a space integral over 2 powers pq of R1 and R2. I don't discuss the more complicated case where you have these powers, but these can be also integrated in closed analytic form. This is given by an explicit expression involving gamma functions. So there are all these factors, but that are very easy. And there is the distance. The result is the distance between the two particles to the power p plus q plus 3. And this formula and more complicated formulas permit to obtain the Fokker action exactly in closed form. Riesz formula, I think this is 1949. So finally, you obtain the Lagrangian, and I will write the Lagrangian at 1pn order, or I will discuss actually in more general terms. So you will have the mass terms. There will be the Newtonian Lagrangian. And there will be the gravitational potential term. And you remember from yesterday that it is absolutely crucial to compute the gravitational part of the Fokker action correctly. And naively, we could have said, okay, the Lagrangian will just come from the matter action in the Fokker action, you know, but no, if you use only the matter action, the result will be incorrect. You have also to use the gravitational part of the action, and if you don't use it, then you will find that the potential term is incorrect. There is a wrong factor in front of that. So there is already at Newtonian order a crucial contribution which comes from the Einstein-Hilbert part of the action, and that we have computed yesterday. So now at 1 p.n. order, I write for you the complete terms. With the coefficients for you, m1 v1 cube, and there will be plus g m1 m2 over r12 minus 1/4. So I denote the scalar product by parentheses. Yes? Ah, yes, okay. But, okay, you don't need very much the details of that. This is to show you, but that, so. And there will be minus 1/4 v1 n12 v2. Scalar products between velocities, v1, v2, and the unit vector which is there, n12, so between the two minus 7/4 v1 scalar v2 plus 1 gives 2, and this is a complete 1 p.n. part of the Lagrangian. 1 p.n. term. And here, this is a Newtonian term, and here, the rest mass term. And I will finish this part by telling you a little bit more, some basic features of the Fokker-Lagrangian at higher order. So if you continue this calculation at the next order, which would be 2 p.n., a feature that appears is that the Lagrangian depends at that order, at 2 p.n. order, 2 p.n., on positions, velocities, and accelerations. So at that order, at 2 p.n., you have a generalized Lagrangian, which depends on position A, velocities, and also accelerations. So you have to consider a generalized variation. So you have the standard Euler-Lagrange equation, and then you have to add a term which corresponds to the accelerations. And it goes on the same way at higher order. At 3 p.n. order, then you find that there are UV divergences that are crucial. And UV divergences are due to the fact that we model our compact object by point particles. This is something very common in field theory, quantum field theory. You have always these UV divergences because of your model for the particles to be just described by point particle with delta function. And then you have UV divergences, and you have a regularization, which is absolutely crucial to implement. And it has been shown in the past that actually dimensional regularization is to be used to cure these divergences. And then at the next order, 4 p.n. order, there are infrared divergences appear. And again, you have to use DIMREG to cure these divergences. So what are the infrared divergences? Yes? Sorry, I don't try to... so where? Here? R12, P plus Q plus 3. Okay, so these are products of velocities. V1, V2, accelerations, derivative of accelerations. You have many factors with many indices that are contracted together. Okay, so this is when you plug all the potentials that were computed inside the action. You have to consider the integration of some terms that have been computed previously. And the general structure is that one. I wrote just the general structure you see of all these terms. Sorry, so this should be a product. So this goes like that. Okay, so this is just a factor depending on velocities, acceleration, and so on, which is just a function of time. Okay, sorry. Sorry, I am writing very badly. Oh yes, sorry, yeah. Okay. So at 4p order, you have infrared divergences, and I was going to tell you that these infrared divergences, why do they appear? These are infrared divergences which come from the behavior of integrals at infinity. Infrared divergences, this is because in the Fokker action, so I should write it here in the Fokker action. In the Fokker action, you have an integral on all space of a quantity which is defined using Pn theory. And as you remember from Monday or today, Pn approximation is valid only in the near zone of the source. While here, you will integrate it all over space. So this implies that you have some infrared divergences which appear that have been to be cured using dimensional regularization. However, since we are doing real physics, there should not be divergences, and the fact that there are divergences is because there is a term which is missing in this approach for the moment. And combining the two terms, you can show that then the infrared divergences, if they are treated correctly with dimensional regularization, will actually cancel out. And the term which is missing, which appears first at 4p order, is a tail term. Let me just sketch for you that at the 4p order, there is a tail contribution which comes into the game. So you will have your binary system. Okay, your source. It will emit gravitational waves at any time, okay? And tails are produced by the scattering of gravitational waves on the curvature of space-time generated by the mass of the source, the total mass of the source. So the space-time is not Minkowski space-time. The gravitational wave propagate in some space-time which is essentially the Schwarzschild space-time associated with the mass of the source. And there are well-known scattering effects where a part of the gravitational wave will be scattered by the mass. So there will be a scattered gravitational waves, so which will propagate along the light cones. Okay? And this implies that part of the gravitational wave will be incoming and will add up to the linear gravitational waves emitted at instant t, but which will come from emission in the source at instant t prime, say, much less than t. So this is a 4pn effect. And to this effect, there is a similar effect in the waveform. So if I consider a field point x, so there will be propagation along the light cone, so I will have the light cone associated with that. There will be also direct scattering of waves which arrive in your detector, due again to this scattering by the mass of the source. By the way, these drawings are completely equivalent to Feynman diagrams. The Feynman diagrams are nothing but drawings like that for my classical interaction. Okay, so you understand now much. These drawings are actually completely implemented using Feynman diagram, if you like. And so there will be a 4pn effect in the far zone also, but actually this is 4pn means 2.5 pn beyond the quadrupole formula. Because the lowest order in the quadrupole formula is of the order of radiation reaction effect in the source that are themselves 2.5 pn order. And I was wrong here. This is 1.5 pn order beyond the quadrupole formula, which is 2.5 pn term, which is a radiation reaction in the source. And at the 4pn order, there is a term which is associated with that has been to be added to the formalism I just described previously. The way it is added is by some matching between the near zone and the far zone. I am not sure that I will have the time to discuss that, but anyway, there is a well-defined procedure to add the tail term in the Lagrangian. And by tail term in the Lagrangian, I mean a particular conservative term associated with tails. I have written here dissipative effect linked to radiation reaction, but actually there is a conservative part. So this is essentially dissipative, but there is also a conservative part which has to be added to the Fokker-Lagrangian at the 4pn order. And the Fokker action, including this corresponding to this tail term, is given by the formula. So this will involve the coupling between the mass of the source and the quadrupole moment of the radiation, of the linear order radiation. And in the action, there will be a double integral over t and t prime divided by t minus t prime of the quadrupole moment of my source with 3 time derivatives, quadrupole moment of my source with 3 time derivatives evaluated at t prime. So this term is added to the Fokker action determined by means of the symmetric propagator. this is a term which corresponds to actually an homogeneous solution of the wave equation, therefore that we don't know, and which is added by a matching argument, matching between the near zone and the far zone. And so this is added to the added by matching between near zone and far zone. And this should be computed in d dimensions, because we are using DIMREG. And when you do that, you will find that there is a pole coming from this tail term. And this pole will cancel out the pole which comes from the infrared divergences in the Fokker action. And the result will be finite. And the result, this finite part, when it is computed correctly with d in d dimensions, and then taking the limit d tends to 3, finally solves the problem of the equations of motion. Notice that this tail term implies that the dynamics is non-local in time. Since you see the action which is the integral of a Lagrangian, and the Lagrangian itself involves another integration from minus infinity in the past up to t, an integration over t prime. And so the dynamics becomes non-local in time at the 4pn order. Okay, so I can give you some more details for 5 minutes about dimensional regularization, which I think will be good, and then we could go to the problem of gravitational waves, or maybe we can directly go to quadrupole formula and so on. Okay. Okay. Let us review a little bit the dimensional regularization, which has been used in this problem, and which is probably the only known method able to cure all this problem and to get the physical correct answer. Yes, please. Excuse me?
I was just going to ask if there's any other method that does this.
Yes, okay. So let me discuss that
and just
in more details.
And you said that earlier that in the post-Newtonian expansion breaks down in the far zone. So when you do this matching, how are you computing in the far zone?
Okay, so how to compute this term, you mean?
Yeah, no, when you do the matching between the near zone and far zone,
yes.
How do you do the far zone computation? Do you use post-Minkowski or something else?
Yes, exactly. So I may discuss that on tomorrow. Okay. So the idea is to work in space-time with d is equal to d plus 1 dimensions, and to therefore solve the Einstein field equations in d dimensions. So d will be closed to 3 generally, the physical space dimensions. So the Einstein field equations in d dimensions will have exactly the same form as in 2 dimensions, 3 dimensions, sorry, or 4 space-time dimension, and the factor here will be 1/2 in any dimensions. You may know that. which will be 16 pi g over C4, the stress energy tensor of your matter. So there is no difference except that the Newton's constant in d dimension will differ from the Newton's constant in 3 or 3 dimensions by some constants that have to be introduced into the problem, which will be a length, sorry, and I should write that it is d minus 3 here, which is a length, a constant length, associated with Dimreg. And you can write it also as R mu nu, which is given by the source term. And sorry, there should be minus 8, which is the usual coefficient in the field equations, over C4. And then you will have the trace reversed Einstein field equation, which will then depend on the space dimension d minus 1 and the trace of the stress energy tensor. So you will have the d dimension to be taken into account here. All the formalisms with the potentials and so on can be generalized very well to the Einstein field equations in d dimensions. So the idea is to do all the calculations with the dimensions d, which actually that has to be seen actually as an arbitrary complex number. And when you have expressions involving the dimension seen as a complex number, you systematically use arguments coming from analytic continuation in this parameter in order to give a sense to any expression for any values of complex dimension except for some poles that occur at integer values of the dimensions. So you work in the complex plane of the dimension, so you will have here the real part of D and the imaginary part of D. And whatever calculation you do, you will have some terms that happen to diverge when the dimension goes to the physical value, which is 3. You may have divergences in D is equal to 3, but your expressions are valid generally in some regions of the complex plane where everything is meaningful. Of course, this excludes the physical value, d is equal to 3. So here you will have some convergent integrals, for instance. For instance, the Riesz formula that I showed you will be completely convergent in some region of the complex plane. And that what you do is that you extend that by analytic continuation. Using the unicity of the analytic continuation of complex functions. So this will be a function defined everywhere in the complex plane, except that there will be poles at the physical dimension, because initially your quantity was divergent, and there will be also poles at other integral values of the dimensions. But since you have an expression that is valid everywhere in the vicinity of the pole, then you will control exactly the solution, And you can make an expansion around the pole and then show that the poles disappear at the end, and that will be completely satisfying. Why is it a very good method? This is because you are solving the Einstein field equations in d dimensions, and the Einstein field equation in d dimensions have the usual symmetries of GR, notably the covariance, the invariance by arbitrary change of coordinates, the so-called diffeomorphism invariance, okay? And that is valid for the Einstein field equations in d dimensions. If you start from point particles described by delta functions in d dimensions, and you make your iteration, use analytic continuation, automatically the regularization will take care of the basic invariance of GR, notably the diffeomorphism invariance. So this is a mean to keep through the regularization process the diffeomorphism invariance of general relativity. And therefore, it is probably it is a very good method, and I would guess that it is probably the only method that can treat the problem of divergences at high orders. By contrast, remind that yesterday, the Hadamard regularization, you remember that when you have your singularity, y1, so you approach the singularity through some direction n, okay, you add the I2. You remember that the Hadamard finite part of a function f which is singular around the singularity, you remember that I consider that it is some power R1 A times some coefficient. So if a function is regular except at the singular point and admits when R1 tends to 0 a singular expansion of that type, the Hadamard partie finie at 1 was given by the average of the finite part coefficient in that expansion, that is the one corresponding to A is equal to 0, average over the direction of approach to the singularity. And in general, Fg1 is different from F1 G1 because of this nasty surface average over the angles. So you lose, because of that, at some point, actually it occurs at 3p order, you lose your gauge invariance of your theory, because if you don't have that, I mean that the gauge invariance of the theory will be lost. By contrast, with dimensional regularization, you escape all these problems, and this gives you a completely consistent answer. So I don't know if I argued enough regarding that. I don't know of any other proof, but it seems obvious to me that these field equations in d dimensions will be completely correct, involving the basic symmetries of GR, and that you can do consistently your calculation. And I will conjecture that this is the only regularization which can treat the problem. So just a few more details. So if you have, so you are in d dimensions, spatial d dimension, you will have the volume in d dimensions, so this will be ggx, and if I write it in spherical coordinates, this will be r to the d minus 1 dr, and there will be also the surface element of the sphere in d dimension, d minus 1 dimension. in d minus 1 dimension of sphere of d minus 1 dimensions for the surface of the sphere. The volume of the sphere in d minus 1 dimension is given by 2 pi over d times gamma function of d over 2. And I will write in red some exercise for you. It's a nice, funny exercise for you. You can ask me if you want to do it and you want the solution of that. It's to prove this expression that the total surface of the sphere in d minus 1 dimension is given by that. And when we iterate our potentials in d dimensions, we have to consider the Green's function of the Laplace operator in d dimensions. And that is given by something that I call U, which therefore solves the Laplace equation with the right-hand side, which is the delta function in d dimensions. And the solution of that is the Green's function, is given by a constant that we call generally k tilde in our group, which is R, where R is a norm, just the Euclidean norm of the spatial point in d dimension. And that Green's function is given by R to the 2 minus 2 times this constant, and this constant is given by, again, with gamma functions. And you can also, in the exercise, prove also this expression. And I will suggest you to prove it using a Fourier decomposition. That is the easiest way to prove that relation using a Fourier transformation or Fourier transformation in d dimensions. These Green's function can be generalized in what are known as the Riesz Euclidean kernels, which generalize the delta function in d dimensions. And these obeys some relations that are given by delta alpha plus 2. So these are functions which depends on the dimension D, and on some complex parameter, alpha, and these are given by some constant times R alpha minus D. The constant is given by a gamma function D minus alpha over 2 divided by 2 alpha pi to the D minus 2 D over 2 gamma of D over 2. And these kernels satisfy the set of Poisson equations, that is the Laplacian operator in d dimensions over applied on these Riesz kernels is given by delta alpha of D. So you have a hierarchy of kernels starting with from the Green's function, because the Green's functions is just, with my definition here, is just 4 pi delta 2 in d dimensions. And the delta 0 in d dimensions is actually identical with the Dirac delta function in d dimensions. So these kernels are used systematically when solving the potentials like V, Vi, Wij, and so on in d dimension. You remember that you had the expression of the symmetric propagator, so you have many inverse Laplace operations to perform that are systematically performed in that way. And furthermore, these kernels obey also a very nice relation, which is a convolution relation delta alpha of D convoluted with delta beta of D is nothing but delta alpha plus beta of D. And I give you as an exercise, again, show that this convolution relation is actually nothing but, is actually equivalent to the Riesz formula in d dimensions. You remember the Riesz formula that I was writing before? That is something like integral of ddx r1 alpha r2 beta is equal to something in some closed form expression, which is a formula that we use all the time in order to compute the Fokker action. Okay, so I will just have one last comment. Now, this is very nice. We have the correct regularization. We have the Einstein field in d dimensions. But there is a problem, is that most of the very complicated integrals that we have, or many of these integrals, cannot be performed explicitly in d dimensions. Some of the integrals can be performed explicitly using the Riesz formula, but for the nonlinear, the most nonlinear terms, we don't have closed form expression in d dimensions. So the strategy is actually to come back to our old Hadamard regularization. For the most nonlinear terms, we don't compute them in any dimension d, but only in the limit where d tends to 3. In the limit where d tends to 3, we should recover something that we know, which is related with the Hadamard regularization that we had before, that we know how to compute it up to 4p in order, and then there will be some correction. So the strategy is to relate to consider DIMREG in D is equal to 3 plus epsilon dimensions, and to relate that to the Hadamard regularization in 3D, in D is equal to 3, okay, plus something that we call the difference between DIMREG and Hadamard regularization. And plus terms that are 0 when epsilon tends to 0, plus O of 1 of epsilon. So we have a precise way to connect the expansion of the result in d dimension when epsilon tends to 0, and in that limit, we know how to connect it in a precise way to the Hadamard regularization, and there is all a machinery of formulas in the Hadamard regularization based on the so-called partie finie of Hadamard of some integrals. And to that, we know that we should add a difference which will involve poles in the dimensions plus, so there will be a coefficient, which will be I minus 1, and then there will be some coefficient A0, which is a finite part when epsilon tends to 0, and then terms that we can neglect, since we are interested only in the limit epsilon tends to 0. And the point is that we know how to do this calculation, and also we know that even so, we don't know the full result in d dimensions. And we know that because we know this term, because actually these terms depends only on the singular behavior near in the vicinity of the particles. So you have y1. The calculation of DIMREG and Hadamard will agree everywhere outside the singularity, so we have only to consider the expansion of the difficult potential near the singularity in order to control this term. And this is a strategy, and I think that in this problem, at least with our approach, there is no other strategy. We are obliged at some stage to compute the Hadamard regularization of complicated integrals and correct it by the poles coming from DIMREG. And this is a strategy we have used. And I will stop here and answer the questions. Absolutely. So it is not necessary, in this case, to compute the Hadamard regularization. For some of the simplest potentials, for instance, V, Vi, and so on, we compute directly in d dimensions and put the limit epsilon tends to 0. And that's the result. You are right. Yeah.
But then I didn't understand this point you made about why you want to go back to Hadamard.
Ah, yes, okay. Because you have some very complicated nonlinear integrals say, for instance, integral in d dimensions of some potential w, ij, di, v, dj, v, and w, ij is box minus 1 of di, v, dg, v, something like that. This integral cannot be done for any dimensions, in d dimensions. There is no closed form expression. Well, we don't know of any closed form expression for this integral. So we are obliged to compute this integral first in 3 dimensions using the Hadamard regularization. And it works. In 3 dimensions with Hadamard regularization, we have an answer. And so the problem is to connect this answer to the real result that we would have in d dimension, but that we don't know when re-expanded back when epsilon tends to 0. And so we have to add to this particular term, which are therefore necessary for the most difficult of the integrals that we meet. Yeah, exactly. So this was what I was just saying, is that this works because this difference, you know, the 2 regularization gives the same outside the particles. The problem is only in the vicinity of the particles. So now you can compute this integral very close to the particles, just you consider only the divergent terms, you know, near the particles. And for that, you can do that for all these complicated things, and so therefore control this term as well. You know, because thanks to the Hadamard regularization, you have computed everything except in a neighborhood of the particles. And this neighborhood of the particles is taken into account correctly with DIMREG by this difference that we perform. So we know how to generate all these potentials as Taylor expansions or singular expansions in the vicinity of the potentials. Yeah. No, this is valid for any dimension except for integral values. So 3, 2, yes, and so this is defined everywhere, except for at singular isolated points. Yeah. Other questions? Okay, so, okay, thanks.